Let's take a look briefly at the continuing black male church, the black churches that are being bombed, which is an important issue. And I'll tell you what, the behavioral science unit at Quantico, Virginia, have diagnosed African American people in this country as a very emotional people. And when you deal with an emotional people, you give them an issue, you deal with it, you give them a nice speech, you give them a photo opportunity, and then you let them go, and then you can go ahead and burn it. You can burn down the whole South then, because they're happy because you dealt with their emotion. When you deal with people who are both emotional and intellectual, then they're never going to give up on an issue until they get results. They don't care if it takes 50 years, something's got to happen. We're going to get some results. And the burning of the black churches, it was a strong emotional issue. We all looked at that and said, what is happening? And didn't even, and looking at it from an intellectual standpoint, it was obvious to an extent what happened. The 16th Street, the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church and the killing of those 3 little girls or 4 little girls occurred right after the March on Washington. Then right after the Million Man March, you have an increase in church burnings. The reaction always to a group of black people getting together and unifying under any leader is to retaliate by scaring them and intimidating them. It happens the same way in both cases. And intellectual people begin to put that together. And then when you have your churches being burned on a regular basis, you don't even accept the fact that they're being burned until they give you evidence. How can someone come before you, Bill Clinton or whoever the friend of black people is for this year, can come before you and say, we've got church burnings. And give you no evidence. Out of all the people in this country, we should ask for evidence. Okay, if it's a burning, then show me a gasoline can. You can't just come in. It could be a bombing. That makes it domestic terrorism. But they don't even approach you with the possibility that it could have been a bomb instead of an arson. They produce no gasoline, no can, no rag, nothing. They just say it's a burning, and we nod our head and begin to repeat it. These are church burnings. We should demand evidence, and intellectual people say, no, we've got to have some evidence, right? When you go to court, they want evidence. You can't go and say, my theory is that I'm innocent. No way, you're going to jail forever, if that's your theory. They want evidence, but they come before us with the burning or the bombing of the black churches, and they presented no evidence that these are just arsons. Now, the Domestic Terrorism Act says that domestic terrorism is whenever 2 or more individuals, okay, and try to intimidate a group of people by destroying people or property. 2 or more people, that's all it takes for it to be domestic terrorism. Now, when terrorism occurs, when you arrest people, like these people, they're telling you they're arrested and they're convicted who were former Klansmen, which is another insult to your intelligence. What in the world is a former Klansman? Why would you quit the Klan to go burn churches? Isn't that what the Klan do anyway? Why would you retire from the Klan to go out and burn churches? And not former Klansmen, they're just Klansmen. That's what they are, and that's what Klansmen do. So don't tell us they're former Klansmen. By doing that, the Domestic Terrorism Act indicates that it has to be 2 or more people organized. So if they tell you they were former Klansmen, that no longer makes them a part of the Klan, so they can say it wasn't organized, it was just an arson instead of an organized effort, and then they have to investigate it under the Domestic Terrorism Act. And under that act, these people don't plead guilty to arson, they plead guilty to terrorism, and they're labeled as terrorists. Now, it's a lot. Now, you know when we get in trouble and we go before the court, they want the most severest charge placed on your record, so you never get another job again. Now, imagine the difference in the charge of being called a terrorist or an arsonist. So they're being charged with arson when the statute says it's domestic terrorism. And then they appeal to our emotion again. President Clinton and Congress come out and say, we've got these tougher laws on church burnings. Well, you haven't proved to us yet that it's not domestic terrorism. In fact, by definition, it is. By the definition that I worked under when I was with that organization, it's domestic. So we don't need any new statutes. We don't need our black political leaders running around saying we need some new political statutes. We want them charged under the Domestic Terrorism Act, which means, too, that the federal government must rebuild the churches, right? It doesn't mean that you have to go out and hold chicken dinners to rebuild the church. Under the Domestic Terrorism Act, the government has to rebuild the churches, but they move away from domestic terrorism. And they certainly didn't want to call it domestic terrorism when it began to happen, because you had the Olympics coming to Atlanta. And we're talking about we're going to hunt down terrorists wherever they may be in the world. And then in reality, they were right here in the South next to the Olympics, right? And then, so they couldn't admit to that. They couldn't say we had domestic terrorism, so they said, yeah, we got a few crazy people starting fires, and we buy into that. Then they send Bill down, and he sings some old Negro spiritual with us, and we buy into it, and then he takes a photo opportunity, but we got no concrete answers. And even today, churches are still being burned. Churches was burnt last week in Texas. So it is still not solved. Besides all the chicken dinners we had and programs we had and Clinton coming down and speaking to us, we have still not solved it, but we've moved on to other things. Now, we have a lot of issues to deal with, but there should be a church burning task force or church bombing task force. You deal with this, we'll deal with the CIA, you deal with the FBI. You don't have to concentrate on one thing at one time. We're more intelligent people than that, right? But now that whole issue of the burnings and the bombings have gone silent. What we were such in an uproar about a few months ago have now gone silent, and now we're moving on to something else, and churches are still being bombed and burned as of last week. They're still convicting former Klansmen. 4 last week convicted, fled out. 4 Klansmen fled out last week. Former Klansmen is the way they said it on the news. And you know immediately, again, when you hear that you don't quit the Klan, you don't have a retirement plan, and if you want to quit them and change your ways, you don't quit them to go burn churches. You can do that in the Klan. And you got some help there, right? They didn't even charge the individuals who helped them out in that. They are appealing to our emotion rather than our intellect. They can come before us, give us those wonderful, eloquent speeches, and then we will accept it and nod our head and say, Bill's doing something for us. He's going to handle this church burning thing, and right now, they're still being burned. They're still being burned as of last week. They're appealing to our emotion. Behavioral Science Unit have told them to appeal to our emotion instead of our intellect, and it is working. We need to be more vigilant on that, stay on top of that, to every single perpetrator have been caught in those cases. The other thing about those burnings, one of the last burnings that occurred down in the South, the police and the FBI came out and they gave this statement, and they said, you can tell we're being vigilant because the last person at the church, 10 minutes before the church was burned, a police officer did a check, so he's keeping an eye on his checks. Well, intellect tells you that the last person on the scene is the first suspect, and you don't care what kind of uniform he's wearing, but they turned that around and said to you, this means we're being watchful, and you should have turned it around and said, no, this means you got an interrogation to conduct. Because when they come to your neighborhood, when people commit crime, they want to know who was the last person that you see over there. And no matter who it is, they get interviewed. In this particular case, the police officer became a hero, and he was there 10 minutes before the church burned. Another way they appeal to your emotion. They tell you that, well, the church is burned to the ground so quickly because they're in rural areas and it takes the fire department a time to get there. That's something you tell your children. Intellectual people want to know, well, what is the average response time? Give us some numbers. Don't give us some grand statement that it take a while to get there. Who can you give that math? Who are you talking to? We want some, we can do some math here. Give us average response time. How long does it take them to get from here to? We want some scientific numbers, data, and information. Then you are appealing to our intellect. Then we can do an investigation. Some grand general statement that, well, it takes a while to get there. It's something you would tell your children when they're in the back seat of the car. They say, are we there yet? And you say, no, we'll be there soon. That's what they responded to us with. That's all they have responded to us with. No estimated response time. No other group of people are going to buy that mess. We'll time it ourselves. I'll get in my car and I'll drive from here to there and see what these response times are. But they don't have to do that because the FBI Behavioral Science Unit has said we are an emotional people. Appeal to their emotion, don't worry about their intellect. Bring an issue up, discuss it for a month, and it'll go away and they'll go on to something else. And you don't ever have to deal with it again. And that's what they'll do on issue after issue after issue with us, unless we change that ourselves.